All right. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ahmed Flex Omar. I'm the Deputy Director and CXO for MALA, Muslim American Leadership Alliance. We're an arts and culture organization, 501c3 non-for-profit that focuses on story telling. And today we're bringing you an incredible story. But as I mentioned earlier, it's in honor of World Refugee Day. And today's not World Refugee Day. Refugee Day is on the 20th. So thank you for spending your Friday evening with us. We have Sali Mahgoub, who's moderating the discussion today. And Sali is the Director of Development at the Obama Foundation. And Sally's been doing the work of development for a long time, and she's skilled in non-for-profit management, international development, strategic planning, and philanthropy, among other things. And she graduated from Iowa State University. Currently, Sally serves on the board of the American Model for the United Nations. She's been involved with Model United Nations since 2001. Where she served as Deputy Undersecretary General of Research. And additionally, Sally serves on the Board of Trustees for the Sudanese American Medical Association. And she's a young professional ambassador at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'm going to give the mic now to Sally to introduce today's guest. And please enjoy this discussion.
Thank you, Flex. It really is my honor and pleasure to do this today. I honestly cannot think of anything more that I want to do right now than talk to Yasmeen, who just after talking to her the first few minutes, I fell in love with her. And I think you would too. She's just a strong, wonderful young leader who's just doing wonderful things for us. And today you're going to find out all about it. So let me start with the formal bio, but I cannot wait for everyone to hear about Yasmeen's story, and I'm sure you will be just as inspired as I have been every time I talk to her. So Yasmeen Telsem is the partner marketing manager for strategic partners at LinkedIn, which is a mouthful, but she actually started her professional career working as a regional field director for the Obama and Biden re-election campaign, and later pursued a master's degree in public administration. And then her career took a little pivot, and then she started working, for NBC Universal as a page program. And she has continued to be successful and started working for successful award campaigns for films such as Fences, Arrival, Silence, Florence, Foster Jenkins, and Roma. And her experience and talent landed her in a role at Martin Scorsese's Tequila production as an assistant to the Academy Award-winning director on films such as The Irishman, Rolling Thunder, and Bob Dylan's Story by Martin Scorsese. And then in her recent role, previous role at Warner Brothers, she worked on the distribution and licensing division, driving the lead on the HBO library sales package, focusing on and reviving Black and Latinx stories. Yasmeen was also selected to participate in RARE with Google's leadership cohort 20. And the story does not even end there. So Yasmeen, it is a pleasure to have you here today. And I cannot wait to do a deep dive and learn more about you and your story. So maybe we'll start with that first. Given that, this is in honor of World Refugee Day, I would love just to hear more about, your story, where you came from, and what does World Refugee Day mean to you?
Well, thank you guys. First, I want to thank both you and the Mala Foundation as well for having me here today. and just speaking about my experience as a first-gen American. But I would be remiss if I don't talk about sort of the importance my mother and my father had in my life. And for everyone who doesn't know, I'm of Eritrean descent, first generation American, born and raised. I always say by way of Eritrea, because my heart will always be there. So my mother and father came here in America in the I would say late 1980s. And this was during sort of the Eritrean and Ethiopian War. And my mother, who happened to also be a freedom fighter, helped with the success of that and eventually granting us our independence. We celebrated our 30 years, I think, last month. And so my mother has always been sort of a big factor in my life, the same way as my dad, who ended up fleeing Eritrea, pursuing higher education in Egypt, and they both met in Saudi Arabia, and that's kind of when they came to America. Family is extremely big for me. I am a product of four. I'm a twin, not the oldest. Muna is her name, will tell you every 5 minutes that she's older by 4 or 5 minutes. So I can't take that reign. But the one thing that really stuck out for me was when Flex came to me and asked me, I'd love for you to speak. And I'm a marketer and I love to brand and I love to do all that. But when it comes to sort of self-branding, it takes a little push for that to happen. And I really wanted to set this conversation around refugees. And so we picked today to have that conversation. And I want to, if I can, explain the importance of this day, especially in America right now, when we're still dealing with border issues and we're still having issues with people saying it's not okay to come to this country. We are not, all of us, if you're not an Indigenous person, came here in some sort of way, unwillingly, willingly, other circumstances. So it's best to understand people's story, I say. And today, and I know organizations are now creating a week-long event for World Refugee Days. Also, don't forget the ones that are currently suffering now.
Wow, that's it's always a good reminder. As someone that was born and raised in Sudan, I can certainly, and I wouldn't consider myself a first gen, but I certainly connect with that. So just to do a little bit of a follow-up question to, what does World Refugee Day mean to you? Can you, I know you said that, your mother was a freedom fighter, an activist. Can you just tell me a little bit more about her story, and what have you learned from her, whether it's in your personal or professional life?
Oh, my parents are my best friends. I always say this too. It's like when you're first gen or when you come to America with your family, your parents, you have a unique bond, I feel, that most people don't have, right? So you're learning to grow as into an adult, and they're learning to grow in a new nation. I always say my parents, sort of the most selfless thing a human can do is sacrifice their life for their parents. I mean, for their children, sorry. Like, you only get one life. And for refugees to just say, you know what, I'm leaving everything I know to make sure my children have a better life. It's one of the most selfless things. And so that tells you volumes already about who my parents are. But my mother specifically, unfortunately, didn't have a childhood, like many Eritrean born folks. And even currently now, where you have to fight and you're fighting every day. And she fought for the freedom of her children. My dad's brother, who my younger brother is named after, Hebu, lost his life fighting for his country at 18. And so sort of that civil liberty, that civil, independence is kind of in our blood. My mother, I don't have photos of my mother going to prom. I have photos of my mother carrying an AK-47. I mean, that's pretty badass, right? But it reminds you that kind of like, she sacrificed a lot. And so it always, and I think for me and my siblings, it's always, how do we ensure that we're making them happy? And so you end up kind of doing the same thing your parents did, and sort of you're now living for them. So everything I've ever tried to aspire to be was to make them happy and proud.
That's incredible. I completely hear you when you say, yes, there were no prom pictures. That's not the culture they came from.
Yeah.
But, you know, one of the things that, you know, you mentioned in terms of, you know, sacrificing for your kids, and then, you know, you, on the other hand, as a child or as their son or daughter, wanting to make them proud, I feel like one of the best ways to do it is, of course, by education. So
Yeah.
I would love to learn just a little bit more about your educational background. And so, yeah.
Oh, so education, as I'm sure you're aware, you know, being raised in sort of a Sudani household, that education is like bread and butter, like it's everything. And I, you know, I kind of was, I don't know if this is the right term, but I was kind of like a rebel educator sort of person, because I always questioned things. You know, I was never the one to just say because somebody said so that it was the right way. And I think that happened, and this is the importance of literature, specifically in sort of my middle school era, where people, you know, were reading, you know, the Odyssey and the other Shakespeare. And I'm like, I want to read about the autobiography of Malcolm X, like, but as told by Alex Haley. Like, that resonated to me as a Black Muslim woman. That was the only literature that I could sort of relate to, right? And so, and then that book kind of shifted my mindset. And then I started reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and that was life-changing. And then I got into Race Matters by Cornel West, who I had the privilege of marching side by side for Stop and Frisk back when the Occupy Wall Street movement was happening. And so I've always been that sort of person to you know, engage what I've been learning. And that kind of was like my middle school years. High school years, I started questioning a lot of things. I think I told you a story about where I did a paper, and it was in the realm of a film. And I said, look, it was about the story of Jamie Foxx playing Ray Charles. And the story was basically me saying, look, unfortunately, Blacks are always, during like films, are always talk about addiction, and that's the main focus, and that's the prime focus. And I remember writing a paper about that. A teacher was not too happy. It was an honors course. And I went to my dad and I said, you know, my dad was like, what, why did you get this grade? And I was just like, I know I deserved an A. It was like, I deserved an A. And he said, well, let's go talk to your counselor. Let's figure out why. And so I've always had that relationship with my parents where if they knew something was wrong, they would fight for me. But I also stood my ground. You know, I ended, you know, I was given an ultimatum. I was like, either you take the grade, right, or you redo the paper. And I refused to redo the paper because I felt that my paper should be solidified as what I was given to. And so that kind of set the stage of how I perceived just knowledge. I eventually went to college. My freshman year, I went to Marymount University in Arlington, small private school. It was very close to home, and I thought it was the best thing for me at the time. But I really wanted to go to an HBCU. Like, if I could turn back time, I feel like I would have done that. And there was limitations in my mind thinking that I would be limited by going to an HBCU. And I tell anyone, if you could have that opportunity, do so. And so when you work if you go to school in DC area, you're allowed to take sort of extra classes at Georgetown or Howard or whatever. And so I decided to take a class on Africana studies by Dr. Gregory Carr, who's well renowned now, but I believe he was like an adjunct professor. He was teaching at Temple and also teaching at a high school, and then coming to DC to teach. And it was the first time I felt like I was proud to be an African. And he, I mean, his course was so intense. I mean, like, there was times where he would cancel class and it was snowing and we still would show up, like full-blown class will still happen. And that was what changed kind of my perspective on sort of religion, spirituality, being Black in America. You know, when you're when you come from refugee parents, they don't know what that means. And so that experience changed my my outlook on a lot of things as well. And then I ended up going to VCU to complete my undergrad degree in Richmond, got a degree in public relations. And then I kind of, and I think it's funny that we're having this conversation, Sally, because it's a full circle moment. And I say that because I always say that President Barack Obama has always helped me in a way where he just doesn't know it, right? And so like, and I mean that because there were so many pipeline things that he's created. And for me, the first kind of real gig was working on his election. And prior to that, the Great Recession sort of happened. It was tough for a lot of folks to get jobs. And so I was offered a position to work as a regional field director in South Fairfax County. My campaigning life was short-lived. It wasn't my cup of tea, but it opened another door for me. And I always wanted to pursue education. And so I decided to kind of get my degree in public administration. But again, while I was going to school, I got into a graduate program, and it was another Obama initiative. It was called the Pathways Program, and it was to get young people into the public sector. And because of that, again, it opened up so many doors. So the next time you're in a conference meeting with him, tell him said Yasmeen said thank you. But that kind of was kind of it. Like, you need these programs because sometimes you don't know how to map things out. Like, I was with my dad, me and my sister, figuring out FAFSA, figuring out, like, we were both learning at the same time because we were the first to go to college. And so we don't have those resources. And so pipeline programs are extremely important. Then the next pipeline program I actually ended up doing was leaving the DC area to go to New York City to work at NBC. And so that was another page program where I did sort of rotations at the Today Show, USA Today, not USA Today, USA Network, which was at the time the #1 cable network. And I got to work on, you know, series like Mr. Robot. And so that's kind of like how my education ended up segueing into sort of media.
It's interesting. You talk about education and professional development sort of in the same topic. And I absolutely love that because, and I wish somebody would have told me that when I was in college, that's also what I needed to do. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But one thing that I was hoping, you know, maybe you could give us a little bit more information on is how did you find these resources? I mean, you're a very independent and strong woman, but you know, these resources are not easy, especially for those that are, you know, for people of color, for refugees, for those that don't have first gen, not just Americans, but you know, college attendees here in the US. So what did you do to make sure that you're putting yourself in the right spot or the right place every time?
I think that's a great question. And I honestly say, like, if I can do it, anybody can do it. There was nothing that sets me aside from anybody else. If anything, I've dealt with more adversities, right? Because I'm several minorities, right? I'm Black, I'm first gen, I'm a woman, and I'm Muslim. Like, it's almost every sort of, but it's important to also acknowledge that there now are more resources. And because of that, I was able to kind of just Google things. And I didn't know that the NBC Page program was like this prestigious program and only 1% skip. Like, I took that out of my mind, right? I just applied. I know who I am. I know what type of caliber of a person I am and what I can bring into. And so I just went and I applied. And I did my interview, and I think Natasha, who was the sort of director at the time, and I think she allowed for a lot of minorities to join the program, because don't get it twisted, like it's a lot of nepotism in Hollywood, in TV, in corporate America. And so you know, people are going to take chances on you. And I think She took a chance on me, and I every day was at NBC 60, 70 hours a week, working on Fallon, working on SNL, working at NBC News, PR, pulling in all, like just showing face at every event, until people knew my name. And I think that kind of hustle bustle of the city also helped ignite that. But the resources are there. I just wish that there was ways for specifically, first gen. And I think honestly, like, I think the Obama Foundation has the great capability. And I know you guys are opening up a new big building in Chicago where you're going to be able to provide these resources in very drastic ways. And I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, we have this tiny little project that we've been working on for the last few years, but yes, a lot of what you said is what we inspire to educate young professionals, young leaders, young, youth, even children for that matter of fact about. So, and it's things like I said earlier, I was like, I wish I knew about this when I was in high school. Like, I wish I could go back and tell my old self that. And you said something earlier that really struck a chord with me. You said that you had limitations in your mind, like you felt like you you were limited, but there was just not that way of looking as I'm here, I have this great opportunity, and so I just wanted to comment on that, because that's how I also felt when I went to school. But the older you get and the more you work and the more determined you are, you realize, wait a second, I do have a lot of resources. I just have to go out there and look for them and find them.
Yeah, I think it's also important to realize that, like, you're your own doubter most of the time, right? Like, no one's saying you can't apply to a job. And there's stats that say Black women often, don't go for these roles that ask for like 10 years experience, and you probably have 15 years experience. And so I always say, honestly, just go for it, and network and connect. I wouldn't be where I am currently if I did not connect with people, and not being afraid. I was in these buildings, Sally. I didn't care if you was the CEO, the CFO. I was pulling up, I was asking, how can I meet with you? Obviously respectfully, and I always tell people this: if you're going to meet someone who's of higher stature, just Google them. Figure out a way, LinkedIn, I'm pulling a plug in right now, but LinkedIn is a great resource where you can find people's bios, where they live, and find something where you can kind of connect with them. And so that way it feels way more organic. I've been in elevators with people where I just say, look, I just saw you on such and such, and I know you're from here and here. And they're like, oh, and it's just a casual conversation. They'll give me like a business card or like connect somewhere else. And so I would say the resources of just applying to something limits you. And I think you have to figure out, how do you go above and beyond to put yourself out there? And I'm sure as Black women, we understand that we got to go 10 times harder to even get acknowledged in many rooms. And there's been in many rooms, especially at film and TV studios, where I was consistently the only person showing up for my people, making sure things were getting greenlit again, and providing resources, and not having anyone to be like, yeah, Yasmeen is correct. And I'd have to be like, where's the research team? Pulling up documents, pulling up numbers and stats and saying, this is why it should work. This is why you should renew something. And so it's unfortunate, right, that happens, but you just gotta do what you have to do.
Oh, Yasmeen, you need to start teaching a class. I would definitely be in that class too. But you know what? I'm so glad to hear, you're talking about your experience, and just also, being real about it, because I think that's what we all need to hear. It's like, yes, ideally the world would be a great place where, everybody's given an equal chance. But you know what? Even when you're not given that equal chance for your voice to be heard, or, to be at the table, when you're there, you make the most out of it. So I really appreciate that message. And I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people that are listening right now. But you sort of talked about it, so you're making my transitions really easy to the next question. But I would love to hear just kind of what you're doing now. It seems like you sort of are pivoting again. Now you're working with LinkedIn, so I would love to hear what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I know people wanted to know a little bit more about the film and TV aspect of it too. I mean, I just started at LinkedIn about a month ago, almost next week will be a month. But I spent sort of the past 7 years navigating the film and TV industry where there was nobody like me. And I felt like I did the best possible in doing so, working at NBC, ended up working at Paramount Pictures and at AMC and Sundance, and then consulting at Netflix, and then working for Scorsese. And so a lot of opportunities sort of presented myself in which I was able to navigate that. And I want to imply what I just said was connecting with people. Like my first job out of the program was because my boss, who till today literally changed, her name is Emily Spitali. I think she got married. I think her name is like Spence now, but she was this white woman who literally was like, Yasmeen, you want to learn, you want to write a press release for a series, you want to do this, you do it. And she never said no. She just opened the door for me. And I think for me, I relied on her. And I thought that the industry was her. Like she was just such a great boss. She was a great mentor, because I really didn't have a mentor. And even though it was short-lived, I worked with her for maybe four months or so. She literally changed my perspective and wanting to sort of pivot from the news, public policy into entertainment. And I think I fell in love with her more so than I did the industry. And because of that, she said, look, my former boss is looking for somebody. Do you want to work at AMC? And I was like, of course. And I worked there, and I worked my way up at Paramount Pictures. And then, for Scorsese, who also, there was a networking situation there. And so the story that I have, the theme too that I have, is connections. And I think how amazing is it that now I'm working at LinkedIn, where sort of their mission is figuring out the best way to connect people. And so I'm still learning my new role. I'll be working in B2B marketing, and on the channel side, and it's sort of ad tech, and it's the ad tech space. And super excited about that, and figuring out how I can bring sort of a creative lens. I think that's kind of why they brought me on making our partners stronger. And so that's kind of how I'd wrap that up. So I'm fairly new, fairly fresh.
Well, they're lucky to have you. So, and just like we are lucky to have you here today.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned mentorship, and I would just love to learn a little bit more about, you talked about some of your mentors, but, as a young refugee, someone that's actually watching this right now, what advice would you tell them in regards to, finding the right mentors? Do you email them? Like, there's just a lot of, especially when you don't have, your dad or your mom saying, oh, you should go out there and look for mentors, because we don't have that concept. So how did you do it? How did you find your mentors, and how did you interact with them on, daily or weekly basis?
I would actually tell you, I really did not have any mentorship. And what I mean, like, I didn't have someone that said, look, Yasmeen, this is how you should pivot your 5 to 10 year plan. I had a conversation with folks. I had a conversation with Charles D. King at Macro, who spent his time and said, look, you need to do this, this, this. And that's because that was through another connection. And it's hard in at least my industry to find mentorship. And so what I would say is try to just engage in conversation with folks. Don't be afraid to, I'm like almost 7+ years in, and I'm still reaching out to people asking, like, huge fan of your work, would love to have a conversation with you. I might not get answered. I might get answers, you toss it up. The worst thing somebody can do is kind of ghost you, right? Or say no. And so I think it's hard when you don't know how to maneuver with that. I would put, I just joined Black in Corporate, which I joined a few months ago, and it was initiative by, I don't remember her name, but a Black woman who worked in fashion, and was like, there were no Black mentors. And I was like, oh my God. And I read her story, and they were covering her. And I was like, this is me. Like, and she was like well into her career. And she created this forum for Black executives to help mentor mid-level executives as well. And so I finally got my first, mentor, who we're both pivoting. He's now at MTV, heading up sort of original films and movies there. And it's been great to finally find someone like that understands the struggles that I have. And so there are organizations now that allow you that opportunity. And there's typically an application sort of scenario, engaging on sort of like why you want to mentor, why you want that. But don't be afraid. Your family is your mentorship. Like my mom and my dad are my mentors. If something doesn't seem right, I'd be like, Mom, Dad, I'd call them up at work. I'm like, this doesn't, my dad was like my key person when it comes to, negotiating my salary, figuring out where I should live, what I should do. Like I call them, they have the experience. Just because they don't have sort of the traditional way of doing things, should not be a reason why you don't ask them for help too.
Yes, I completely agree with you and hear you on the parents. I feel like I need them more and more the older I get.
Yeah.
So, now you said something earlier too that sort of got me thinking about, my own life and journey to get to where I am today. But as an East African, Black Muslim women, you and I, as long as there's other people, have had a lot of struggles and adversities that we've faced in life. And so I would just love to hear a little bit more about, some of the struggles that you've had and how you were able to, honestly, most importantly, is how you're able to overcome them, because I feel like this is what this conversation is all about.
I'll give it to you. I told you I was going to give it to you raw. Black women in America are not set up to be successful, or at least succeed. And forget words and terms like microaggressions. It was my twin who said, you know what, stop calling those terms. It's racism, point blank, period. It's racism. But figure out how you can maneuver them. There's many situations, especially in the industry I was prior to, where I put myself on the line for the betterment of others, right? And because I was always, I stuck to my guns, I took action, I used my voice, I have no regrets, right? And I know for a fact that I've made some changes. And I think it's important too for East African women, Black women, just in general, you might not see the legacies you leave behind because you're never going to get your kudoses. No one's going to say congratulations, right? But you need to say, you know what? I'm proud of myself. My younger brother is big on sort of affirmations, and he'll tell people, like, after talking to you, like, I appreciate you. I appreciate you. And I started doing that because I realized, like, once you acknowledge people's work ethic and what they do for you, they're more than willing to be able to do that for you. And then you feel good too. And the industry in film and TV, I know, is kind of shifting away from sort of that toxic behavior as you've seen in the past few years. I think they have a lot more to go. But I would have to say that I would have never changed anything I've ever done. And speaking up for myself in rooms where I felt like no one had my back and didn't have my back. And I think you just have to be kind of solid with your decision making. And once you do that, you're going to be able to kind of like move every day. Like, you have to be able to sleep with yourself at night. Those people don't, they're not going to be there with you forever. And so I say, don't be afraid to find your voice and stay committed to some type of action, because once you do that, you open doors for so many people. And you're not going to get your recognitions, unfortunately. That's just the truth. But recognize yourself for doing that. And sort of framing your own a legacy. And I think that's kind of very important when you talk about sort of finding, battling sort of any issues that come up and adversities, is sort of making sure you stick to who you are.
Another reason I absolutely love talking to you is not only are you, very, very intelligent, strong, just smart, but also you're very humble. I think I didn't hear your, we talked before, but I didn't know about your brother's story, but, just saying that you're able to learn from, not just this big Hollywood exec or this, CEO of some company or this mentor that you've had for years, but also just saying you can actually learn that from people around you, your family, your parents, even your little brother. So it was lovely to hear that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, you have to have people around you that's going to humble you. And I surround myself with those type of people, because, and I'll put a religious twist too. I'm a practicing Muslim, and you're taught to be to be humble, and to make sure that you're putting yourself in other people's shoes. And because of that, I've been able to kind of put myself in places where people like me aren't successful, and making sure I'm putting down the ladder so other people can rise. I don't believe in this idea that I have to be the only person in the room. Like, it's 2021. That makes no sense to me. Like, this idea of like, I'm so proud to be the only Black person in the room or the only Asian person in the room. It doesn't benefit anyone. It benefits me if I have a diversity of thought, if I can go back and forth with somebody that looks like me or has similar stories, where I can, piggyback off of you guys or whatever, and then create some type of story or pitch something, for a greater cause. And so I think that's kind of also important.
Very true. I'm curious, this is a personal question, but I would love just to hear your thoughts on it. You've talked a lot about legacy throughout this conversation. I'm just curious to hear, what legacy do you want to leave behind?
Ooh, I think the last time we had talked, I talked about like how I'm like always undecided, and I've been paving kind of my own way, and not following other people's roadmaps, right? Like, you got to be with a company for 10 years, or you got to, they'll leave you in a drop of a dime. That's the truth. Be loyal to who you are, be loyal to the work that you want to do, but also figure out where the world is going to be in 10 years, right? And if you really see my resume, I've been pivoting slowly but surely into tech, because I knew that they were going to take over. They've been taking over, as you can see, even in the film industry as well. And so I've always made sure that I've created avenues for myself to be successful without relying on others, because it's, I had a boss once tell me, it's a dog eat dog world and you got to figure it out, or like, just straight up nasty. You're going to get people that are going to be extremely nasty to you. They're going to tell you things that you might not want to hear. And you got to figure out how you're going to keep on trucking. And for me, it's always been finding my spirituality. Even if that means, you spend 5 minutes a day meditating, finding your peace, saying you're great in the mirror. I had to do that sometimes before kind of going into something, because I felt so bad by people's like energy. If that means like making your bed, I make my bed every morning. It's the most relieving thing you could possibly do in your life. Right. And so going back to your question about a legacy, I think that the only legacy I'm trying to kind of keep is the legacy of what my parents built. And continuing that in the States, and making sure that, inshallah, if I have kids and family, that, you came from a strong people, a people that fought to the end and are continue to fight, right? We were the underdogs. I've always been the underdog, and I've always championed for the underdog. But also making sure you're executing. Like, if you have a plan, execute. How are you executing, and how are you creating more opportunities for others? So in a nutshell, I think that's an answer. I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm still figuring it out. I'm probably going to figure it out until the day I die. But I think that's the part of life that's fun and fascinating. So.
I love that. You know, you didn't really say it, but I think what you're saying is like just keep learning, keep educating, learning about
Yeah.
yourself. And so I think I mean, what a wonderful legacy. And I can't imagine your parents not being very proud of you right now. So
Oh, I hope so. I'm trying.
I always joke that, you know, it was at least was my parents, you know, like being a doctor, being, you know, that's like the top thing that you do. And then they look at you and I think it's a part for their growth as well. It's like, oh, wait, no, look at Yasmeen. Look at all the wonderful things she's doing. She does not need to be a doctor. She should not be a doctor, actually, because she's just
Well,
wonderful at that. So
that's helpful because, you know, I'm like the rebel child. Like my twin sister's a doctor. I was supposed to go to law school
mhm.
and I was going to pivot that way. And I just felt like media, content, social, like that's king. That's where our voices need to be heard. And so I'm humbled and thankful for the opportunities that God has given me to kind of being able to be successful and consistently have a job in a marketplace where it's tough, where people, you know, and so one thing that humbles me, I think is also my spirituality and praying and realizing that God has given me this, right? And I'm just pushing forward and trying to achieve the greatness that I'm supposed to.
Well, you are. And like I said, I honestly cannot imagine your parents not being so proud of you right now. And your siblings as well.
Oh, that means a lot. Thank you.
So now we'll have some time for Q&A in a little bit, but I do have one last question for you.
Yeah.
And it is, what message do you have for young people in the audience or that are going to be listening to the recording later on, especially those that are refugees that have big dreams like you and your family?
You know, I had asked my parents this question because they were refugees and they came in their sort of, I would say, mid-20s. What would they say to a refugee currently in the state that they're in? And both of them, and I asked the question separate, and both of them said was education. And they said, because if you have education in this country, the opportunity is limitless. And I agree with them. I definitely agree with what they're saying. But I'd like to add another element. And I think the biggest element in this country is understanding financial literacy. And what I mean by that is understanding how to make money. You know, a lot of time, and not just getting a regular 9-to-5 job. Like you don't even, honestly, I'm big on, if you have entrepreneurship spirit and you want to go and take a chance and build a brand from scratch, you go do that. But you do it and you figure out what type of loans there are, how to do that. You know, I always tell people, and I hope there's resources for refugees currently, and the importance of like making sure you have like a Roth IRA account. You know, like it's very easy to just set money aside and seeing that grow, because a lot of times they come to this country and they don't have a retirement plan. And then it's up to the children to figure that out. And luckily my parents, my dad was very financially literate, like understand stocks, made sure that we had some growing up. But it's also important because if you want your children to leave generational wealth, they can't do that if they're still paying for their parents, paying for their family. So I think the importance about that is figuring out finances. That's number one, education and finance. I'd also say I'm not a big person. This is probably not a good thing, but I'm not a big person on the word hope. You know, I think in the Buddhist religion, they think hope is sort of like an illusion. And I switch it to having faith, because if you have faith, you're relying on a power that you don't have, but it also provides you the opportunity to say, look, I have the faith, but I also have to put in the work. Right. And so you're not going to get it just by praying and hope, you know, hopefully that it's going to happen. You got to put in the work. And lastly, I'd say, you know, for a lot of refugees, stay active, you know, get active. Don't be afraid to go out and march and, you know, fight for a cause you believe in. You know, I think for a lot of, you know, I read this piece, I believe it was in the New York Times, about Black refugees in Mexico having a big problem crossing the border. And like, again, you know what I'm saying? And so it's like, how do we shed light for those people? And the best way you can do that is use your voice. And I would say, lastly, I think I've done this, and maybe not so in the beginning of my career, is sort of protect your heart. I think it's very necessary to do. I'm not a big competitor. I just feel like there's enough money for all of us to eat. There's enough success for all of us to achieve. But unfortunately, other people don't feel that way. And if you protect your heart early on, I don't think you're going to see as much disappointment. And I think that's kind of how I would sort of leave that.
What a beautiful message. And just reading the comments as they were coming in, I told you guys, you're just gonna love her as much as I do. So I really do enjoy, just getting those comments and reading them. And I do want to remind everybody that's listening to this right now is to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of the page. And we already received a couple of questions. So the first one is, and I kind of want to know that myself too, but what was it like working with Denzel Washington on Fences?
Oh, so Denzel's great. My mom was a huge Denzel Washington fan. And so when she found out that I was working with him, she was like, you got to get a photo. I was like, Mom, that's not how this business works. But I actually was more, I love Denzel. He was great. I think he does a great job in elevating other Black women, other minorities in his cause, and what he's done with August Wilson's legacy is something very profound. And he was very hands-on. Like, he would be in our press calls, making sure things was happening. Very humble. My favorite person is Pauletta Washington, who's his wife. And she's also, a thespian herself. And I'll recall we're on a red carpet, and I don't know, it was for the Fences premiere. And, during the red carpet, you kind of walk talent. And I was kind of hustling, bustling. And she literally grabbed my hand while she's interviewing with her husband and whispers in my ear and says, I'm proud of you. And I know you're doing great work. Mind you, I was having a day that day, and I'm, me, I'm walking with 3-inch heels. I'm making things happen, but it was just so much. And for her to just stop and say that, to another Black woman, it was, and she's just like that. She does that. I've heard many stories about her. I call her the secret mother of Black Hollywood, because she, she made me feel so important and so valued that night. And he does the same thing. They're just really, really great people.
Oh, that's lovely. And I also like how this transitioned into Denzel Washington's wife more so than him, but it's wonderful. It's a great story.
I mean, he'll tell you, I don't know if even his son, John, would tell you that household is not a household without their mother, without Pauletta. And I firmly believe that she is everything and above and beyond.
Yeah. So Hawa has a question, and she's saying that you slightly talked about microaggressions. Can you tell us a story of how you were ever mistreated in a workplace and how you overcame it?
Oh, yeah. So at my last job, I was dealing with a lot of microaggression, or what my sisters call it racism. And it was about, me trying to figure out how to navigate being the only Black person, and, vouching for Black stories. And that studio in itself has been going through some of that. I'm not the only one. But it's one of those things where you kind of just have to keep going, right? And I talked about it briefly, sort of how are you able to navigate a room and how to navigate your voice. And because I was able to stay firm in what I believed in, I felt like I made change. So I think, especially if you want to segue into entertainment, I've always been in situations where it hasn't been easy. And, it was funny because I was watching the film, The Assistant, on Hulu. And I remember calling my mom. My parents, for a while, didn't have no idea what I mean, till today, they probably have no idea what I do. They're like, what do you do? And so I was like, Mom and Dad, you should watch this movie, The Assistant. And I watched it with them. And there's a scene in it where she's she did a lot, and she's crying. And then my mom was like, is that like when you call me? And I was like, yes. I was like, that's exactly when I call you. There's scenarios like that. And so like, you have to lean on people that are going to uplift you and tell you it's okay. Or maybe sometimes in those environments, bounce. It's okay. You'll find something. Your sanity, your, like I said, protecting your heart and your mental is very, very important, I think. And so I try to do that.
I love how your mom connected with that too, because I think it's especially, you know, if they have not been in the not normal, but the conventional workplace here in the US, it's hard for them to see. So it's, I mean, I think maybe one thing you should remind her also, or tell her, is you're also an activist. You do not carry a semi-automated weapon, but you know, you are doing a lot of work where you're actively helping your community. And so another question that also came in, I just want to make sure I get through a lot of questions before.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm sure.
But so the question said, you mentioned you were pivoting your career. What advice do you have for other people considering similar transitions right now?
So I can say I've pivoted in government, in healthcare, in tech, in entertainment. I've done it all. And I will tell you the best way to do it is making sure you're having a strategy. I think we're now in a day and age where people just want workers that are happy where they are. And you're seeing that shift. I think COVID has sort of, in a funny way, allowed organizations to realize the importance of having an employee that's happy. And so I would say, if you know that you want to go from, you know, working in healthcare into, you know, the tech field, figuring out a way to network, you know, are there programs? There's so many accelerator programs where, you know, you can kind of take them for a few hours a day during the week and, you know, get a certificate, right? And then use that to network, you know, up and above and beyond, and figuring out like, oh, well, I've got this degree. Do you know somebody else? You know, use your alumni, you know, use your family. You know, they have so many connections you might not know that can help you with an informational. And I do informationals all the time. I don't care what field you're in. If I find that you're interesting and I want to learn more, I'm going to do that. And so I think you can't be afraid to put yourself out there. And I say that too, because I'm an introvert in reality. Like me doing this was something that I wouldn't usually normally do. I just like to just work. And so I know that I kind of have to get out my shell sometimes and express some of the knowledge and wisdom other people have. And I think that's how you keep that cycle going.
I think last time we chatted, you said that you were an introvert. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So you're very natural at this. And I think we all need to hear more of your great stories and wisdoms. So I hope you'll continue to do more and more of these.
Thank you.
So just again, to remind everyone, we only have a few more minutes left. If you have any questions for Yasmeen, please type them in. But just another question that came in is, so what did you learn from working with Martin Scorsese? And did you feel like he was an ally for you?
So I'm not big on this word allyship, and I'll tell you why. I feel like, and I'll get into Marty, love Marty. I feel like with the word allyship, you're relying on an individual to always be there to kind of push forward. And what happens is you don't allow the individual that needs to be pushed forward that opportunity. It's like, I need you always in the room, or I need you. And they'll do trainings when they say allyship is like, you know, make sure you're not on the forefront. No, just give me what I need. Right? Like, just give me the resources I need to succeed, listen to what I'm saying, and provide me that opportunity. I don't need an allyship, but what I do need is someone that's gonna like fight for me when I need a promotion. And people go, well, that's an allyship. No, that's your job, right? Like, that's your job. Your job is to make sure I get to the next level. And so that's like, for some reason, that word allyship always bothers me. But working for Martin Scorsese was a whirlwind. It was probably one of the highlights of my life. You know, I grew up watching, you know, they used to call them spaghetti westerns with my dad, like Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like I watched with that. My dad introduced me to like classics like that. And I was, you know, I shouldn't probably have been watching Goodfellas, but Goodfellas was like one of my favorite movies of all time. And to get to work on Silence when I worked at Paramount, and then getting the opportunity to work for him was like one of the biggest, you know, things I could do, or you could do in like a career, is working for a famous director like that. And I was able to kind of, you know, travel the world with him. I learned about African filmmakers through the World Cinema Project that I didn't know. I was like, we have African filmmakers that have been making movies. And, you know, him shedding light on the importance of sort of knowing your rights, knowing distribution, knowing sales, and which ended up pivoting me into working at Warner Brothers. And, you know, it was great, but it was the women behind Marty that really drove me to work for him. You know, his managing producer for over 20 years was Emma Koskoff, who started off as his assistant and worked her way up. And, you know, was during the time I was working with her, was also working on Irishman and Joker, like 2 Academy films. And, you know, working with Thelma, who's a Jewish Algerian woman who went to school with him and has been his editor for 50 plus years. And Marion Bauer, who's his researcher and like co-producer, and like seeing all these strong women, you know, working for him was fascinating. It's so funny. I'll tell you a funny story. So when I was working for Scorsese, I'd like try to figure out who I can meet with, like, you know, other assistants or whatever. And I reached out to Spike Lee's assistant, and he was like, yo, you should just come to Brooklyn. Let's kick it to Brooklyn and I'll show you the office. And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't want to run into Spike, because when you're working, you're working. He's like, no, you should come now. So I went over to Brooklyn, and I don't think they thought I was like Black. And so I go in, and like, we're in like, you know, he's like showing me like the office or whatever, the 40 Acres and a Mule. And he's like, I just told Spike, like, Marty's assistant is a Black woman. And he was in the writer's room. And he's like, oh, I have to see her. And so he comes up, and I'm like, it was like an impromptu thing. And that was kind of like a funny story, because like, I guess they didn't believe that he could like hire a Black woman. And so, you know, I'm forever thankful. There were barriers too. There were people that really didn't want me to succeed working for Marty, right? Who was this Black woman out of nowhere working, you know, as his like assistant and running his office. And so there were a lot of barriers that I had to kind of, you know, fight to even be around or like be heard. But again, like, he's a phenomenal person, you know, obviously opened so many doors just working for him. So it was a privilege.
Well, just like LinkedIn is very lucky to have you, he was very lucky to have you. And I'm sure it was an honor for him as well. So, you know, we only have just a couple of minutes left. I just want to give you, you know, the opportunity to, is there anything that, you know, you want to say or share, you know, as the audience and people that are going to be listening to this later on?
Yeah, you know, I would definitely, you know, I have a motto. It's like create, execute, win. And it's a very simple motto. And I think I do that with sort of my everyday, and trying to figuring out how to navigate this like world, this life. But for me, a lot of it is also, you know, staying humble and making sure you're reaching out to people that want to see you succeed. Like, if they don't want to, don't waste your time, you know? And I think as refugees, it's very important. And even first gen Americans, to find your voice, find it as soon and as early as possible, because it really is going to shape who you are. And, you know, I'm thankful for everyone that's believed in me and my life, from my cousins to my family, to my siblings, to you guys for having this conversation with me and allowing me to sort of shed some type of, you know, inspiration, you know, during a really tough time for a lot of people. And so, especially you, Sally, like, You know, you all obviously are killing it. You know, you're another East African woman, you know, director of development for the Obama Foundation. Like, that's huge and you should be celebrated. And I couldn't be more honored to be, you know, in this virtual stage with you. And I wish it could be longer, and we're gonna have to like connect again in person one day. And Mala and everything you guys have sort of allowed the opportunity for me to do. And I think that's all I can say for now. But I would say is stay tuned, you know. As I create my roadmap, you know, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's literally the only social platform I'm on. I'm a very private person. So connect with me there. And I'm looking forward to, you know, figuring out what's next.
Thank you, Yasmeen. I really agree with all the comments that we're getting right now. Everybody's just saying how inspirational and just incredible you are. So, so yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, especially on a Friday evening. I know you have plenty of things to do, but I really do appreciate and cherish this time that you have carved for us and for Mala. And I hope that you'll, you know, consider doing more and more of these in the future, because as everyone's saying here, you're extremely inspirational. It's just very impressive to hear your story. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And yes, stay tuned. And, you know, well, maybe one day we'll do this in real life too, in person. So
yeah, would love it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Yasmeen. Thank you so much, Flex and Mala. And we hope everyone has a wonderful evening and weekend.
You guys too. Bye.